The NFL draft is finally here. And spoiler alert, the Chicago Bears are drafting Caleb Williams with the number one overall pick. So today we're going to learn more about the ups and downs of Caleb Williams' journey through college football with the help of our friends from Locked On USC.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on X at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on a classic Monopoly game. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. On the show today, we'll be joined by Marc Kulkin from Locked On USC Trojans to break down what he saw from Caleb Williams throughout his 2 years there in college. We'll look at how things were so great in 2022 and why they weren't as good in 23 and kind of what changed from year one to year two of the Caleb Williams experience in California. We'll also look at Caleb Williams as a leader, as an emotional player on the sideline, and how that was viewed by his teammates and fan base. We'll talk about Caleb Williams' father's involvement with his time at USC and how much the supporting cast mattered. How good were the receivers actually? How well did these USC receivers project to the NFL? How much was Lincoln Riley's system helping Caleb versus maybe not asking him to do enough? What about offensive line problems? And some of the other prospects coming out of USC in this draft that we may want to know for the Bears' other picks after number one. There's a lot to get into here with Marc, and he really knows USC really well. So you're going to learn a lot about what he went through in college, especially if you're not a big college football person. So let's jump right in. Joining us now on the Locked On Bears podcast is Marc Kulkin. He is the host of Locked On USC here on the Locked On Podcast Network. He's also a writer for wearesc.com. Marc, appreciate you joining us today to talk some Caleb Williams and some Trojan football. I want to start sort of like big picture. What has the Caleb Williams experience been the last couple of years from the moment he transferred in with Lincoln Riley to now departing for the NFL and the Chicago Bears? Like, how do you sort of reflect on this era of USC football?
It was a fun 2 years. When Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams eventually, followed him along and came over to USC, USC wasn't in the greatest of spots. They were coming off a bad season. Obviously, they had to replace Clay Helton. But you bring in a player of Caleb Williams' caliber. USC is known for their Heisman trophies. Just so happens they're getting one back again. So they're now up to 8. And Caleb Williams was USC's 7th Heisman Trophy winner, depending on how you want to categorize it. So he was actually their 8th. So in year one, USC goes from, below 500, a 4-win team. All of a sudden now they're winning 11 games. They're a game away from them making the playoffs. They've got another Heisman Trophy in their inside Heritage Hall, and everything's looking great. 2023 comes along. You're thinking, all right, you're going to build off of that 11-win season. Everyone knows USC's challenges have been, they didn't have a defense. And so things didn't really go according to plan in 2023. Whether or not Caleb put too much of that pressure on his shoulders, offense, he carried them. They did well. But I think everybody will remember there was a point last year where he just had that, I'll call it a breakdown. They lost the game to Washington, and it was that moment where he was in his mom's arms. And I think it was at that moment where Caleb's like, you know what? I put everything into this. I came here not just to win a Heisman, but to win a championship. I think it was at that moment that he knew he wasn't going to be able to get that team goal that he was striving for. So that was the difference between 2022 and 2023. It was a great roller coaster ride, but it did not finish the way anybody really wanted the ride to end, I guess is the best way to put it.
I wanted to ask you about that breakdown, right? That moment with his mom on the sideline. I think that's something that throughout this draft process, people from the outside bring up as like, oh, well, what kind of a negative reflection is that on Caleb? But like, how was that received at the time? And like, how do you think that, like, from a USC perspective, like having Caleb having been there and established himself up to that point, like, was that controversial for Trojans fans at the time, or was it kind of something that's just like, this is who he is and he wears his heart on his sleeve and everyone sort of loves him for it?
So Caleb he's one of the most competitive people you're ever going to meet. And winning the Heisman Trophy obviously added a little bit more pressure, a little bit more to his plate. And so how do you do better than what he did as a sophomore? And he even said, I want to have better statistics than my Heisman campaign. That's trying to do a lot. And so now all of a sudden the expectation level is up there. And I don't know whether or not the fans had reasonable expectations, but then all of a sudden you're watching the game, you're watching the team play the following season, and things just didn't look right. Was he trying to do more than he should? Was he not just letting the game come to him? So I don't know how it played out is maybe the right way to say it. There was a little bit of a disappointment. People were expecting USC to take, all right, you can win 11 games in year one with the turnaround. What should they be able to do in year two? And it just never materialized. In fact, you went from 11 wins to where you're losing 5 out of your last 6 games of the season in your final season in college. It just, like I said, didn't go according to plan.
Yeah, were there significant changes to the USC roster in terms of, like, I mean, obviously every year talent leaves and talent comes in, but like how big of a change was there on the team, or what was different from year 1 to year 2 of Caleb Williams there?
So yeah, you did have some roster turnover. Your offensive line changed, but it wasn't as much the personnel difference as much as it was, I think, again, Caleb wanted to do more than what he should have been trying to do on the field. There was whispers that, hey, the play's been called. Why is the play clock down to 3 seconds again? Is Caleb changing the play? Is Lincoln Riley changing the play? Are they trying to be too perfect? So yeah, the offensive line wasn't as good as it could have been as the year before. Did they use the running game as much as they could have? That's another discussion we could have. It's, again, kind of, it is what it is. You did not have a defense. You're constantly chasing points because you're playing from behind at times. And even when you're scoring 40 points, that's not enough. I mean, there were times last year where USC had to score 50 points to win on the road at Cal. I mean, it's those types of things.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. If you're a competitive person, this game is perfect for you. If you love Monopoly, you will love Monopoly Go because it's been downloaded over 150 million times as a great new twist on Monopoly, where you play on not one, but hundreds of different Monopoly boards in crazy locations, allowing you to build up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is really about messing with your friends. You can charge them rent on your iconic properties as you'd expect from like a classic Monopoly game, but you can also heist their bank vaults to get their riches for yourself. And they've got leaderboards that show you who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. It's not just your competitive side that's going to love it, though. You can also team up with friends and people from around the world in these timed tournaments to get even bigger rewards to score big. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, plus you got the baseball season in full swing, and it's technically not too late to bet on the NFL draft. FanDuel is going to be the place to get all of your bets in because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's right. Win or lose, $150 in bonus bets is going to be added right into your account. So you can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks and draft picks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on which players are going to be drafted in which slots, how many players at each position are going to be drafted, who the first and second offensive linemen and receivers are going to be off the board, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I wanted to ask about the offensive line in particular because I think and we just experienced this with Justin Fields in Chicago, and now with Caleb, this chicken and the egg conversation of like, okay, how much is it offensive line talent deficiencies? I know they had injuries and had to move some guys around, versus how much of it is, well, the quarterback is holding on to the ball too long and then making the offensive line's job too difficult and making them look worse than they are. I know it's never black and white, right? It's never all one or all the other, but how do you sort of see that split with what we saw at USC last year?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Lauren. It's a split. It gets to a point where if you're Caleb, I said he's a very competitive person. He wants to keep the play alive for as long as possible. And sometimes that means I'm going home run as opposed to just taking what's there. Sometimes if it just means taking off and running for 3 and 5 yards, take that. If it means dumping off the pass for 5 to 6 yards instead of waiting for a Brendan Rice to come open 40 yards down the field, take that. Other times it's the offensive line not doing their job. You lost a left tackle, you're moving someone to a left tackle who, is having to learn that position in 1 year. You're going from a starting center to a guy who hasn't played center since high school, now taking over that position. And so again, you bring up that type of stuff, injuries, the lack of depth, and it came down to the chemistry wasn't there. When you don't have the same offensive line 2 years in a row, or even when you're using some of the same players but you're moving them around, I think that played a big role. That played a large role in it. But you said it. How much of that was Caleb holding onto the ball too long? Because again, he's trying to get that home run play rather than, hey, let's just keep the chains moving.
How would you evaluate the receivers around Caleb? Because there's another chicken egg thing here where it's like Caleb Williams is a great quarterback, so he could make perhaps lesser receivers seem better than they are, but at the same time, they were super productive and they still have to get open and catch the ball. And you also add in Lincoln Riley's offense is kind of known for producing some of this offense. So, like, how do you evaluate, I guess, the quality of the players versus, the scheme and the quarterback play being what helped elevate them?
Well, look, I don't think I'm breaking any news here. Lincoln Riley has an offense that is very quarterback and very wide receiver friendly. So, and USC does not lack for talent at the wide receiver position. You see them putting guys into the draft every year. It's going to happen again this year. So you said it's a chicken and the egg type of thing. Caleb Williams can make any wide receiver look good, but if you're putting outstanding talent around him on the outside as well, I don't think anybody's going to complain about that. So, if Chicago happens to be the team that drafts Caleb, I know they went out and, they got a pretty good wide receiver from the LA Chargers. Kind of gives you an idea that what they want to do. Hey, if we're going to get Caleb, let's surround him with some good players. You see other teams, they'll draft quarterbacks, but you got to have the tools to play with as well. You see that happening with the New York Jets all the time.
How much do you think that friendly Lincoln Riley offense took things off of Caleb Williams' shoulders versus putting things on Caleb? Because it seemed like Caleb wanted to take a lot of things on and, like you said, try and do so much. But this Lincoln Riley offense also is known for creating some of those layups. Like, how do you see that push and pull between quarterback and offensive play caller there, trying to get the most out of each other, but also wanting to do the most for each other?
Yeah, that's a dynamic between coach and quarterback. They weren't actually shy about it. They talked about it. They had some contentious times, but there was that unspoken communication. So, look, when you have a generational type of talent, and even if you're a Lincoln Riley type of coach, sometimes you just got to roll with it. It's kind of like Phil Jackson saying, "All right, hey Kobe, don't do that." You don't. What did they say? The only person to stop Michael Jordan was his head coach. And so you just don't do that. You call the play, you know what Caleb's capable of doing, and you kind of see what happens. And that's, again, when you have that kind of talent and when you're as competitive as Caleb is, you saw what he did during his Heisman season. It's hard to, kind of corral that. It's that wild Mustang. You got to let him play. You would never tell Patrick Mahomes, don't do what you're doing on the field.
How would you describe Caleb Williams' father's involvement in his time at USC? I mean, it's something that I think kind of, I don't know if scares is too strong a word, but has Bears fans kind of like looking around like, okay, like, is he going to be someone who's heavily involved in everything, or like, and it's kind of an amorphous role in our mind. It's like, okay, well, how involved was he really, or is this something that kind of gets blown up to be more than it actually was?
Yeah, I think that's being blown up a lot more than it actually was. I'll be honest with you. You know, outside or other than when Caleb Williams was making the decision on where he was going to transfer to, there really wasn't a Caleb Williams dad's father's getting in the way type of thing. I think that is something that somebody thought, hey, you know what? Let's start a narrative here. And it just kind of, people ran with it. Caleb Williams wanting to be part owner. Yeah, I don't know where that stuff comes from, but it's out there. So
Definitely an annoying part of the process for sure.
yeah, it really is.
What I've got you, I wanted to go through a couple other USC players in this upcoming draft class. We touched briefly on the receivers earlier, but Brendan Rice and Taj Washington in particular, both expected to be drafted. I think Rice a little earlier than Washington, but more like day 2, day 3 of the draft. There's not a first round wide receiver in this group, but like, how do you project them specifically to the NFL? It seems like you mentioned the USC track record here. I mean, Jordan Addison and Drake London and Michael Pittman, and now Amon-Ra St. Brown just got his huge contract as a 4th round pick, which is more where someone like Brendan Rice might go. But we can't expect both of these guys to be that good. But how do we sort of set realistic expectations for them?
I think you should set that expectation of them being that good. Brendan Rice, obviously, you know where he comes from. You know, he comes from good stock, as they say, and he's probably a better athlete than his father was. So depending on team needs, whomever drafts Brendan is getting a long time, big time contributor in the NFL. He's going to be NFL ready the second he arrives. He's got the body, he's got the speed. He worked on his hands when he was at USC. He's going to be ready to contribute. If you take him in the 4th round or later, I mean, I can't think of a better value pick. As far as Taj Washington, maybe one of the most underrated guys. All he does, he is a consummate team player. Forget his size. He will go across the middle. He has no problem running between the safeties, running between the linebackers. He's got enough wiggle in his hips that he can take you deep. He was my favorite He was my favorite wide receiver when he was at USC. It's his personality. He'll give you the shirt off his back. A very selfless person. He is a willing blocker. He is everything you want from a wide receiver. So again, if Chicago has the opportunity and Caleb is looking for somebody he can rely on, you can't go wrong with either one of them. I would say Brendan is probably more of a big play wide receiver. But if you want somebody who's just going to be consistent, move the chains, can run any type of route, Chef is your man, Taj Washington. Guy loves to cook. He's got his own cooking channel too.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who maybe aren't actively searching for a new job right now, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 88% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So you can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. You might not have a draft, an NFL draft, to be able to get the brightest young talents for your organization, but LinkedIn can help you get access to the best qualified pool of candidates. It's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. What about on the other side of the ball, Kalen Bullock at safety, a guy that would fit, I think, what the Chicago Bears are missing in terms of a young, rangy free safety. But I know there's some concerns about, the sort of the physical strength there and maybe some missed tackles along the way. How do you sort of see that playing out during his time at USC and then projecting to the NFL?
That's a very valid concern. He is a very rangy. He's a ball hawk without a doubt. He in high school he played wide receiver and defense as well, so he kind of has those natural instincts on how to track the ball. There's been a lot of conversation that a lot of teams in the NFL would like to see him at cornerback because he's got those types of skills. Now, you brought up his physicality. That's one of his limitations. His nickname was Sticks. He tries. He does as hard as he can to add weight, but he's just got one of those bodies that it doesn't hold. So if you're looking at him as a ball hawking type of safety, yeah, you draft him. I personally think he would have a much longer career as a boundary type of corner.
And one other guy who I don't think has gotten a lot of attention in this process, and maybe more of a later round projection at this point, but Solomon Byrd from the defensive end position. I don't mean to completely ignore Marshawn Lloyd, who's a very good running back, but from a Chicago perspective, I don't think they're in the market for a running back of that quality, at least in this draft. So I don't mean to disrespect him.
Austin Jones.
We'll say that again.
Don't forget about Austin Jones if you're looking for a late round guy.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so talk about Jones and also Solomon Byrd, like a couple guys that maybe aren't getting the kind of attention. But what did you see from them in their time at college? And do you have that hopes that they can be more than perhaps where their draft stock will reflect?
Sure. So Solomon Byrd, he transferred into USC from the University of Wyoming. Mature young man, family already. He's just a hard worker. The thing with Solomon, look, USC's defense prior to this season, they were running a scheme that some players will say didn't necessarily utilize their talents the best way. Solomon Byrd was used as a rush end, a defensive end, and against certain offenses, you can use him in packages. I think he's more of a run type of defender than a get after the passer type of guy. Will he be drafted? I don't know. He's probably going to be a free agent signee, but it's somebody, again, you want to bring into your locker room. He's just got a strong work ethic. You're not going to have to ask that guy, do it again. You're not going to have to tell him, don't do that. That's not the right way of doing things. He's the type of person who is going to do things the right way. Again, Austin Jones started off his career at Stanford, came to USC when Travis Dye arrived. He was one of those transfers. And this past season, he was just that steady type of guy. He can run the ball between the tackles. Doesn't have great speed, so he's not going to break any big plays for you. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, but he can also pass protect. So I know the running backs aren't highly valued in the NFL anymore, but if you have somebody who can catch the ball out of the backfield as well as pass protect, that's an added element that I think the NFL looks at now with their running backs.
One more thing before we let you go that I forgot to ask about earlier. I know this came up more early in the process of people look at USC and say, oh man, Caleb Williams skipped the bowl game and Miller Moss comes in and throws 6 touchdowns and has this huge performance. So they say, see, it wasn't actually Caleb being very good because any old quarterback can step in that bowl game and be great. I guess, what do you say to that argument? How do you sort of evaluate why Miller Moss was so good in that spot? And what does that say about Caleb Williams?
So let's just put Caleb aside for a second, and let's talk about why Miller Moss was able to do that. Caleb Williams was one of the most highly recruited quarterbacks coming out of high school. Maybe people aren't aware of this. Miller Moss was a really highly recruited quarterback coming out of high school. He was actually going to play at Mater Dei his senior year. That was the COVID year. So he didn't get to play at Mater Dei. Instead, he enrolled early at USC. And then Caleb Williams transfers in. So he was learning from a great quarterback guru in Lincoln Riley. He's watching Caleb Williams do what he's doing on the field. And all of a sudden, he's given an opportunity. What do you do when an opportunity knocks? You walk through the door and you take advantage of it. And again, he's got some pretty good skill players around him. You had Taj Washington playing in that game. He had 4 freshman wide receivers that turned out to be pretty good in that Holiday Bowl against what was supposed to be a really good Louisville defense. Miller Moss goes for over 300 yards, 6 touchdowns. That's why, look, Caleb Williams would have done that. Might have done even more. USC has an eye for quarterback talent. They've never been shy with their quarterbacks. They've never been shy with wide receiver talent. And now you bring in somebody with a Lincoln Riley who has that type of knowledge, who knows how to develop quarterbacks. This is what you get.
Well, it's looking like it's going to be a really strong draft for USC again this year. Mark, really appreciate you joining us and lending us your expertise on the Trojans. What are you working on this offseason? What is the spring looking like for USC? If people want to tune into Locked On USC, what can they expect from you?
So what you're going to get from me is a lot of opinion. Right now, we're big into the transfer portal season, so I'm keeping an eye on offensive tackles, defensive tackles, filling positions of need. I keep everybody up to date 5 times a week on what's going on with the USC football team. And when I'm not doing Locked On USC, don't forget to head on over to wearesc.com. We give you a lot of written content over there as well. So I'll keep everybody filled in on USC football and basketball information all summer long.
Great, Mark. Thanks so much, and keep up the great work over there. And heck, if the Bears drafted any of these USC players, we might come right back to you and go a little bit more in depth on them.
I'm ready when you're ready, man.
Thanks again to Marc Kulkin from Locked On USC for joining us on the podcast today. If you enjoyed our conversation and maybe learned a thing or two about Caleb Williams, make sure you hit that subscribe button on Locked On Bears to make sure you're keeping up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Whether you tune in on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel or in whatever your favorite podcast platform is, we really appreciate you making Locked On Bears your first listen each and every day. The podcasts are going to be coming to you fast and furious throughout the draft and coming out after the draft. We're going to have clips going up on our YouTube channel breaking down each individual pick. And then we're going to have, of course, tomorrow's podcast. We're going to talk about the Bears, the Caleb Williams pick, and then also whatever they do with the 9th overall pick. Then I think on Saturday, we'll talk about what the Bears do on day 2. We'll have a bonus Saturday podcast for you. And then presumably Monday, we'll talk about day 3. And if there's any other kind of like big trades or anything else, you can be sure we'll have you covered right here on Locked On Bears. That's why you got to subscribe. That's why you got to make us your first listen every day. And in exchange, I'll make sure to find time for you to bear down.